Hello, Dr. James Bogash, expert in health and longevity and creator of Bogash Life and Balance. And as I get a little bit older, pushing on 52 now, I'm always looking for things that I can find that will maintain muscle mass or do whatever I can to stay in as good a shape as I can as I get older. And I don't know, maybe a year and a half ago, I came across this concept of blood flow restriction training, or BFR. And the idea is that you restrict blood flow in the arms or the legs and do the same types of exercise. The concept is when you deprive those limbs or those muscles of oxygen, then the response is greater. So you can do less work with more growth hormone release, more muscle growth, more hypertrophy. And this can work really well with post-injury, with post-surgery, different things. There's a lot of scenarios where this can work well. Now, the BFR goes from, it's pretty cool that shows up on the green screen, but I just went with a cheap set initially on Amazon. They were maybe 20. I don't use the leg ones. These are the arm ones. You can see that in the opening picture. And they make fancy ones that have blood pressure cuffs on them, so you can essentially really be objective with how much pressure you're putting on the arms. For these, I just crank them up as tight as I can and go about my normal exercises. In theory, you should be able to do less work and get the same or better outcomes. So BFR, blood flow restriction, has been around for a while, and this article put together by these researchers is a really good summation of a bunch of different studies looking at what works and what doesn't. And they had some really interesting findings in this study. And they found a couple different things, and I'll kind of go over these. I'll put them in the description. But they looked at basically doing blood flow restriction 2 to 3 days a week versus 4 to 5 days per week. And they found that less days per week was actually more beneficial, which I thought was very interesting. They also found that resistance training, so doing things like push-ups, pull-ups, chin-ups, dips, weights, were far better than walking. And I'm not sure that I would think of as something as simple as walking as being beneficial with these cuffs, but certainly if you're going to do push-ups or modified push-ups or pull-ups or anything muscular related, that these would be more of a benefit than they would if you were just walking around the block. So that inherently to me makes sense, and that's what the researchers found out. And what was interesting is this is very valid. Generally, the societies that make recommendations on muscle growth and fitness recommend or say that unless you go greater than 70% of, they call it 70% of a 1 RM or 1 rep max. So let's say you could bench press 100 pounds. You really wouldn't get benefits unless you were doing at least 70 pounds or more. Well, it turns out that with BFR, that number can drop down as little as 20% and still get decent gains. That's a pretty big difference, especially if you are not physically fit and you're getting started and you're worried about injury. They didn't find that there was an increased risk of injury with this. Now, granted, if you go crazy and let's tourniquet our arm, that's a different story than doing blood flow restriction. And certainly the concern with blood clots and things like that can go up, but that's with crazy type pressures, and that's not what we're talking about. As a matter of fact, they found that higher pressures were not any more beneficial. Generally in the 40, if you looked at blood pressure cuff, the 140 to 160 milligrams of mercury were just as advantageous as higher pressures, so we can keep lower pressures. I imagine I'm probably getting close to that with these blood pressure, or with these cuffs that I use. Potentially wider cuffs with less pressure may end up doing the same thing. These are relatively thin cuffs, but if you could buy a thicker cuff, and after reading the study, I may actually use the leg cuffs on my arms because they're a little bit wider than this. And what was also interesting is they found that most of the benefits didn't really kick in until after 10 weeks. This isn't something that you're going to start today and start looking in the mirror tomorrow and you go, holy cow, I think I look a little bigger. This is something that will take some dedication, about 2.5 months before the benefits were really starting to kick in. And that may be because the way they're working is different than traditional thoughts of exercising. So for me, using these cuffs with the exercises that I do at home are now a part of my normal routine. It's just doing things that I can to maintain the best gains as I start getting older without injuring myself and allowing myself to continue to exercise. As always, I will post the link to this particular study in the description. Make sure you like this video, share it with somebody who you think needs the information, and subscribe to the channel.